Well, hey, this is Adam, and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today, it's a fastback coupe weekend, because we've got my 68 Marquis, 67 Olds 88, a little dusty there, 66 Tornado. So, let's talk about some of the strange features, quirks, and idiosyncrasies of this 68 Marquis. And the first thing is the car really is a unique car. I highly doubt that there is another Wellington blue 68 Marquis left that's in this kind of shape. And why do I say that? Because Mercury made 3,900 of the 68 Marquis, and of that, only 150 were Wellington blue. So just 150 were made. And, well, you can imagine how many survived after all of these years from 1968 to 2024. So my guess is this is the only one left in the United States. I know of one other one that was Wellington blue that had a black top and a blue interior. There was a 428 car, and it went overseas. It was from, I think, California originally, and I actually know the person who owns it, and he's in the process of restoring it. So I know of two, I guess, that came about. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about some of the styling features here, because I think they have, well, some flair to them. First thing, let's discuss are these wheel discs. Now those wheel discs, these were optional on this car. And the wire wheel covers were different for 1968. This was the year in which in the US they outlawed the little spinners. So if you look at the 1967 version of these, it's almost the exact same, but it has 3 little spinners on it. And by this year they got rid of that. I still think they're a handsome wheel cover. They look quite good in spite of being fake. They're not obviously real wire wheels. I'm not usually a wire wheel cover fan, but these actually look pretty good. I love the red center on them too. Next you have this pinstriping that runs the length of the body. My guess is the designers really wanted some sort of lower body trim down there, maybe similar to what Pontiac had in the mid-60s, but it was costed out and somebody came up with this idea to put these pinstripes just to give the lower body some accent, and I think it looks quite good. Third thing is, this car is Wellington blue, so it doesn't show up some of these surfaces, but here you have this interesting kind of fillet and then a radius and a feature line, this top of the fender here, and it doesn't show up as much on a dark blue car. I have one of these in polar white, and it kind of casts a shadow on the lower body. So one of the things I'll just point out when you're looking for cars is the color really makes a difference, especially on these cars with lots of feature lines and surfacing. This one doesn't have a ton of surfacing, if we're honest with ourselves, but I do think it looks still handsome overall. This Mercury front end was very similar to Lincoln's, in particular the 65 Lincoln. If you look at the 65 Lincoln, it's pretty close to the 68 Mercury front end, and even the 67, and it kind of gradually evolved in that direction. I would say even the 65 Mercury front end looked like the 65 Lincoln, but by this point Mercury had kind of inherited that look, and this was the Lincoln Mercury division. Mercury was trying to push up in the overall price class during this time frame and really make these baby Continentals as opposed to dressed up Fords. And that's what the advertising suggested, was that this was the baby Continental, or a way that you could get the Lincoln Mercury ride and the overall quality for a lower price. It failed, unfortunately. And, well, 1967 as an example, this Marquis had more content than the 68. In 67, it still had the 410 cubic inch V8. By this point, the standard engine was a 390, premium fuel 390, 4-barrel, optional 428. But in 67, you had the 410 that was standard, and you also had some power goodies that were standard as well. I believe that power steering is optional on the 68. It was standard on the 67. Manual brakes were standard on both. You got drums, which really, manual brakes aren't bad with drums because they're self-energizing. But with discs, you need power, especially to stop a car this large. And over here we have this side profile, which I love. This was introduced on the 67 Marquis, which was the first year for the Marquis. This is before the Grand Marquis. This is just the Marquis. The Grand Marquis would come into play, I believe, in 1974 as a trim level on the Marquis. At that point, they had the Marquis, Marquis Brougham, and the Grand Marquis. It was not a full model yet. That was later. That came when Ford had two different, we'll call them Marquis in the showroom, the Grand Marquis and the Marquis, one of which was fox-bodied, one of which was panther-bodied. And that's when the Grand Marquis actually became its own marque. It was still just the Marquis, and the Grand Marquis was a trim up until that point. But this lovely roofline was introduced in 1967 on the Marquis, its inaugural year, as well as the LTD coupe. Now, for whatever reason, in '68, Ford decided to give the LTD coupe a different roofline, and I think it's a much more stiff profile than this. This is this beautiful, graceful fastback where this line kind of comes down off the roof, then forms the backlight, and then blends into the surfacing on the trunk. This rear three-quarter view of this car, to me, is just stellar. And I love the vertically oriented taillights. I get people asking me, is this a Cadillac? No, this was a Mercury trait for a few years in the mid-'60s. '68 would be the last year. In '69, they'd go to a horizontal treatment. And the Marquis would also expand from being just this upper end. This was the upper end Mercury. The most expensive Mercury in 1968 was a two-door. You could not get this car in a four-door. You had to get a Park Lane Brougham if you wanted an expensive four-door. But I love these vertical taillights, kind of inspired by Cadillac, also perhaps inspired by the 1964 Pontiac with those crescent moon style rear taillights. And I would say even the rear trim is inspired by Pontiac here in that year. It's pretty similar. It doesn't say Bonneville in the middle of it, but that rear trunk trim is quite similar to what Pontiac was employing during the time. I will say also, interesting cost cut feature, this is a Marquis, so not only do you get that trunk trim, but you get these little end caps on either side. You didn't get that if you had a Monterey or Montclair. They costed those out. Also, the first year for the side marker lights, these are not illuminated, these are just reflectors. I should say the first year for side markers, but those are not illuminated, it's just reflectors. If you got the Marquis, you also got unique jewelry here on the sail panel. This was a Marquis specific emblem, a little different from the Mercury emblem that's on the front of the car, and you got a unique emblem on the trunk. That was not there on the Park Lanes or the other Mercuries. I do love the way that the reverse lights are integrated in here too. Just a great treatment. If we look on the inside, you have a Marquis specific interior with the little logo that's in the vinyl, and you have embroidery on the rear armrest. Get dual front armrests, and this really nice biscuit pleated, this is vinyl, but very luxurious vinyl. I mean, very high quality, well done interior, beautiful door panels, and you'll see one of the great things about these Fords. Watch this door close. I just let go of it. The GM cars didn't do that, and I love my GMs, obviously, but they didn't do that. Here you see this car has power windows. You could get power vent windows as well. I believe the vent window motor was made by General Motors. Ford didn't make their own vent window motor, and I think General Motors supplied it to Ford and Chrysler. Could be wrong on the Chrysler part, but I believe they supplied it to Ford. This also has power seats on both sides. Pretty rare option. Air conditioning equipped car. You can see this Cyclops style speedometer Ford designed during this time frame. There was a philosophy that they wanted the speedometer right in front of the driver. It was the most important gauge, and you notice that a lot of Fords have that speedometer consequently right in the middle of the dash. Something that you didn't always see on the GMs and Chryslers of the era. This Cyclops speedometer was offered in '67 and '68. And a big point of controversy are these slider bars amongst the Mercury fans. Is this one from the factory supposed to be raised up or pointed downward? I've seen them both ways. And I don't know. The brochure actually has it inverted, but I've seen a lot of cars with it like this. And I actually think it looks a little better this way. But the owner's manual and the brochure would have this pointing downward. And you can just turn it around if you want, but I've left it. This is how I got the car, and I think it looks good. If you got disc brakes, you got the disc brake pedal. If you didn't, you just had a pedal that said nothing. So this one is optional. There's a fair amount of optional equipment on this car. Obviously air conditioning, power windows, power seats, AM/FM radio, intermittent wipers too. This has intermittent wipers where you turn this setting counterclockwise for the intermittent function, and you move this dial back and forth for the wipe frequency. It's a really cool setup. It's vacuum electronic based, and this one, it still works on this car, believe it or not, all these years later. Amazing how much works on these cars. This car also has a great anti-theft feature in that they put the key right here in a place where nobody can find it. You can't see it if you're sitting in the driver's seat. You just kind of get used to it over time. They do have, if you have more optional equipment like power locks, you would have gotten a toggle switch here. Power antenna would have had a toggle switch here. The manual antenna is on the front passenger side of the car. This is a manual antenna that you raise and lower by yourself. That's the full down position. And if you got the power antenna, it would be on the driver's side rear fender. But you get a couple toggle switches for those. If you had cruise control, you'd get a pull-out knob on this side. This car does not have cruise. And you have the Moon Crater headliner. I always forget the name. Moonskin headliner. That's what it's called. Interesting vinyl texture here, but I think it looks cool. You also get these little shutoffs down here for the air conditioning. You can pull and it'll shut off the vent. And you can tell the air conditioning from the non-air conditioning equipped cars because this is just a plate on the non-air conditioning equipped cars. Same here. They would just continue this pattern and block that off. Well, unless you got the Comfort Stream ventilation, which it would be a knob here that you'd pull out and it would allow fresh air to come into the car. So you get something a little bit more than those kick panel vents. On the Marquis, you also got this Marquis script right there. And I love these little lights in the doors. That was introduced on the 65 LTD, and it just made the car look so rich. Chevrolet added that to the Caprice when they introduced it in 65 because they thought it looked rich as well. They didn't have anything like that in that price class. Let's open the hood. If I can do this with one hand, give me a sec. So here's the 390, premium fuel 390 under hood. This is again the standard engine. Interestingly, on the Mercury, you got two of these hood latches. On the Ford LTD, you just got one in the center. So you even got one more on the Mercury. This is the York Tecumseh 2-piston compressor. Setup works pretty well. Relatively small charge, 2.5 pounds. The GMs of the era were using 4.5. So it's not as high a capacity. On a hot day, you're running the air conditioning at a higher speed, but it's cold. It's just a lower capacity system with a smaller evaporator and only a 2-piston compressor compared to the GM 6-piston compressors. And you have the second year for the dual chamber master brake cylinder. 67 was the inaugural year for that. Of course, the typical Ford starter relay makes it very easy to hotwire cars. It's not hard at all. And then you have this interesting setup on the air conditioning valves where, just so you know, if you ever want to add a charge, you take this cap off and then there's a little 1/4-inch square head. You want to turn it clockwise to open the valve, not counterclockwise. It's a reverse thread. So bear that in mind until you'll snap it off. You want to turn it counterclockwise to open the valve if you're trying to recharge your air conditioning. Don't forget. This caution fan sticker is on amazingly straight. This is not the right sticker for this air cleaner. That sticker is incredibly rare. There was some sort of dispute between the maker and the aftermarket and Ford, and so you can get the 2 Venturi stickers, the 428 stickers, but the 394 Venturi is hard to get. I have one, but I want to clean up the air cleaner first before I put it on. This is the intermittent wiper setup here that I was talking about. Notice there's a vacuum line going to it here. And then, of course, the wiper motor. And just a great engine overall, propels this vehicle very nicely. So there you have some of the strange features of the Marquis. I will say the other thing, notice this back package shelf is kind of this cardboardy like material. If you have the sedan, it was plastic, it was hard plastic, and that's because on the sedans you could get an optional, on the models, it wasn't standard anymore in 68 on any model, but you get an optional power rear window that would drop about 3 or 4 inches. And as a consequence, if rain got on something that was made of this material, it would degrade it, so they made it plastic on the sedans as opposed to this cardboardy like material. So what do you think of the overall styling? This car to me is super handsome. It's not as great of a style, I would say, as that 6788 in the garage. Ooh, the Ford lovers are going to hate me for that, but it's incredibly attractive. I have 2 of these. I think there are probably about 20 of them left, so I own about 10% of what's left. 20 total 1968 Marquis left in the country. If somebody else has one, put a comment in the comments. I did go to a local car show recently, and it was funny. Somebody had a 68 Park Lane convertible, and he thought he had a super rare car because you don't see those. And I pulled up in this, and he thought it was super cool. In any case, thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care. And then here we are driving the 68 Marquis. Got gas, which is rare. Actually, these cars aren't too bad on fuel, maybe 15, 16 miles per gallon, but just wonderful cruisers to drive, especially roads like this in. Just very high quality cars with great rides, good power from the 390. And nothing to complain about. I love the speedometer. Especially great with hard top driving, no B-pillar. So if you're looking for a cool ride, try to find one of these. If you find one in good shape, pick it up, because they are uber rare. Just overall great cars to try. Thanks again for